a man destined for loneliness, until 4 Apache women asked to be with him that night. Samuel had always been a man apart from the world. From the time he was a boy, he had preferred the quiet of the woods, the sound of wind brushing through the tall grasses, and the soft whispers of the trees over the chatter of townspeople. Life in his small hometown had never been easy for him. He was not unkind, nor was he harsh. Yet there was a certain solitude in his presence that drew people away without him meaning to. They would try to talk, to include him in their gatherings, but something in Samuel's quiet manner made them hesitate, as if he lived on a different frequency from everyone else. And he did. He saw things differently, thought things differently, and most of all, he felt differently. By the time Samuel reached adulthood, he had learned to accept this solitude as part of who he was. It was not a forced loneliness, though often it felt like that. It was a choice he made quietly, almost instinctively, because the world had never truly fit him. He worked his land meticulously, waking before dawn to tend to his fields and livestock. Each morning, as the first light spread across the hills, he would take a deep breath and feel the calm settle over him. There was peace in the routine, and yet, sometimes, there was also a hollow ache in his chest, a reminder that no matter how fulfilling work or nature could be, human companionship was a need he could not ignore entirely. Samuel's home was modest but well kept, a small cabin at the edge of the town where the forest began. It was built by his own hands, every nail driven with care, every plank placed with precision. Inside, the rooms were simple: a small kitchen, a sturdy wooden table, a chair that creaked slightly with use, and a bed that looked out through the window at the rolling fields beyond. There were books stacked neatly on shelves, journals filled with his own thoughts, and a few photographs of his family from long ago. It was not a house of extravagance or decoration, but it was a home that reflected Samuel's life: quiet, practical, and deeply personal. Despite the calm of his surroundings, Samuel often felt the weight of his loneliness most sharply at night. The days, with their labor and small tasks, were manageable, but the evenings stretched endlessly, bringing with them an awareness of isolation that no work could erase. He would sit by the fire, sometimes with his dog curled at his feet, staring at the flames as they flickered and danced. He would think of friends he never had, of conversations that never took place, and of laughter that had never reached his ears. And yet, even in these moments, there was a strange comfort in being alone, in knowing that the world outside could not impose its chaos on him here. Samuel's neighbors were familiar figures, though he rarely spoke to them at length. They were kind in their own ways but never truly understood him. There were occasional greetings at the general store or nods across the street, but deeper connections were rare. The townspeople had labeled him as the quiet one or the loner, sometimes even hinting that he was destined to remain alone forever. It was a label Samuel had come to accept, though he never fully agreed with it. He did not mind being alone, but he also knew that life had more to offer than silence and solitude. There was a curiosity in him that longed for connection, even if it had been buried under years of self-imposed isolation. He found companionship in small things. His dog, a loyal and intelligent animal, was perhaps his closest friend. The dog had a keen sense of Samuel's moods, always lying near him during times of sadness and bounding with joy when he smiled. Samuel also found comfort in the land itself, the way the wind would rustle the leaves, the rhythm of the seasons, the patterns of birds that visited his fields. Each sunrise brought a new palette of colors, each sunset a reminder of the day's quiet achievements. In these moments, Samuel felt alive, connected to something larger than himself, even if that connection was with the natural world rather than other people. Yet, beneath this calm exterior, Samuel carried memories of what he had lost or never had. As a young man, he had once hoped for friendship, even love. He had tried to reach out, had shared parts of himself with people who seemed interested, only to find himself misunderstood or dismissed. These experiences left him cautious, teaching him that solitude was safer than rejection. Over time, he built walls around his heart, not out of bitterness, but out of a desire to protect what little he had of himself. And so, his life continued in a delicate balance. The comfort of isolation mingled with the quiet longing for something more. Despite the hardships, Samuel never became bitter or resentful. He had a soft kindness in his nature that showed in small, unnoticed ways. He would help a neighbor with a stubborn gait, offer extra vegetables from his garden, or lend a hand to someone who needed it without seeking recognition. These acts were not attempts to gain favor or friendship. They were simply the natural expressions of his character. Samuel was a man who lived quietly, who gave quietly, and who felt deeply, even if the world around him never truly acknowledged it. The isolation also allowed Samuel time for reflection and growth. He spent hours thinking about life, reading about history, learning about distant lands, and writing down his thoughts. His journals were filled with musings about the human condition, observations of the world around him, and the occasional story he imagined, though he rarely shared them with anyone. These reflections were a window into his mind, showing a man who, while quiet and solitary, was richly complex and profoundly aware of the world beyond his cabin. As he grew older, Samuel's solitude became a defining feature of his identity. He embraced it not as a punishment but as a reality of who he was. People often asked why he didn't marry or why he lived so far from the town, and he would offer simple answers that did not fully capture the depth of his choices. In truth, Samuel believed that life had a rhythm, and perhaps his time for companionship had not yet arrived. He hoped that someday, in a way he could not predict, his life might intersect with someone, or some people, who could understand and share his world. And so, Samuel continued his life on the edge of the town, living quietly, working diligently, and carrying the quiet ache of loneliness with him. Each day was similar yet subtly different, each season a gentle reminder of the passage of time. He accepted his solitude but did not surrender to it completely. Somewhere deep inside, a small flicker of hope remained, a hope that life could surprise him in ways he had never imagined. Little did Samuel know, that hope was about to be tested in the most unexpected and extraordinary way. The wind rustled through the trees one evening as Samuel settled into his routine, stacking firewood and preparing his modest dinner. The shadows of dusk stretched across the cabin, and for a moment the quiet seemed almost too deep, as if the world itself had paused. Samuel felt the familiar pang of isolation, but also a strange anticipation, a sense that something unusual might occur. Perhaps it was the way the clouds gathered on the horizon, or perhaps it was just the restless stirrings of a man who had lived too long in solitude. Whatever it was, Samuel could not shake the feeling that this night, like so many others before it, would be unlike the rest. And so, as he sat by the window, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, Samuel allowed himself a small, private thought. Maybe, just maybe, life had more in store for him than quiet fields, loyal animals, and empty nights. Perhaps the world, in its mysterious way, had a way of bringing people together, even the most unlikely of people. And with that thought, he closed his eyes, not knowing that the night ahead would change everything he had come to accept about himself and his life. Samuel woke to the soft, uneven tapping of rain against his cabin roof. At first, he thought it was just a passing drizzle, a typical late evening shower that swept across the plains from time to time. But as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes and peered through the window, he noticed the sky had darkened considerably, and the clouds were thick and heavy, almost as if the storm had been waiting for him. He could hear the wind picking up, whistling through the trees and bending the grass in strange, rhythmic patterns. The quiet of his home, which usually comforted him, felt heavier tonight, as if the house itself was bracing against some unknown force. He stepped outside for a moment, pulling his coat tightly around him. The air was fresh but charged with energy, a kind of restless tension that made his skin tingle. He looked at the horizon and noticed shapes moving in the dim light. At first he thought it might be the usual herd of deer that grazed near the edge of his property, but the movement seemed too deliberate, almost human. Samuel's heart quickened slightly, not from fear, but from curiosity. He had grown used to his life of solitude, but there was something about this evening that felt unusual, as if it were preparing him for an event long overdue. Returning to his cabin, Samuel lit a small lantern and carried it to the kitchen. He began preparing a simple meal, chopping vegetables with precise movements, the sound of the knife echoing slightly in the quiet room. Normally, he would have eaten quickly and returned to his journals or to the warmth of the fire. But tonight he moved more slowly, his mind restless, his ears attuned to every sound outside, the whistle of the wind, the tapping of rain, and the distant rustle of something moving among the trees. Each sound made him pause and consider possibilities. Each shadow beyond the window made him wonder if he was about to witness something extraordinary. Hours passed as the storm drew closer. Rain began to pour in earnest, creating small rivers along the uneven ground surrounding his cabin. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the darkened landscape in stark, brilliant bursts. Samuel could see the trees bending and swaying in the wind, and he felt both awe and concern at the power of nature surrounding him. It reminded him, as it often did, of the delicate balance of life, how easily everything could change in an instant, and how small and fragile one could feel when faced with forces larger than oneself. As he settled near the fire, Samuel thought about the long nights he had spent alone, the quiet years he had accepted as his lot in life. He had grown accustomed to his solitude, yet the feeling of expectation, that strange sense that something unusual might happen, kept him alert. He reflected on past experiences where his attempts to connect with others had failed, on conversations that had been awkward, on friendships that had never fully developed. Yet tonight, as the storm raged outside, he felt a flicker of hope, a quiet whisper in his heart telling him that life was unpredictable and that perhaps the night held a surprise he could not yet imagine. Then, faintly at first, Samuel heard voices. They were soft and carried on the wind, almost blending with the sound of the storm. At first, he thought it might be his imagination, the sound of the wind creating echoes that resembled words. But as the voices grew closer, clearer, he realized that they were indeed human. His heart began to beat faster, a mixture of anticipation and wariness filling him. Few people would venture out in such weather, and the idea that strangers might approach his remote cabin both startled and intrigued him. He went to the door and peered out, holding the lantern high to illuminate the path. The rain streamed down, soaking everything in sight, and the wind pushed against the cabin walls with force. Through the blur of the storm, Samuel noticed figures emerging from the darkness. There were 4 of them moving steadily toward him. They were women, he realized, though he could not yet discern their features clearly. They seemed confident, unafraid of the rain, their steps purposeful despite the muddy ground and howling wind. Samuel's mind raced. Who could they be? What brought them here to his isolated home in the middle of a storm? By the time the women reached the cabin, Samuel had opened the door. The wind and rain swept inside for a moment, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and pine. The women looked at him with calm, steady expressions. Their clothes were soaked, clinging to them, but there was a strength in their posture, a sense of certainty that made Samuel feel both cautious and intrigued. They introduced themselves simply, explaining that they had been traveling and became lost in the storm. They asked if they could take shelter for the night. Samuel hesitated for only a moment before stepping aside, inviting them into his home. Inside, the warmth of the cabin contrasted sharply with the cold, wet storm outside. Samuel offered them blankets and helped them dry off as best he could. The four women thanked him with polite, genuine smiles, and in that moment, Samuel felt a strange mix of relief and curiosity. He was used to solitude, to a life without surprise, and yet here were four people in his home, unexpected and mysterious, bringing energy, life, and warmth into his quiet existence. He could not have imagined such a scene, even in his wildest thoughts. The storm continued to rage outside, creating a natural barrier that made Samuel's cabin feel like an island of safety. The women sat near the fire, their eyes reflecting the flickering light, their expressions calm yet lively. They spoke in gentle tones, sharing fragments of their journey, stories of long walks through forests, nights spent under the open sky, challenges they had faced and overcome. Samuel listened carefully, absorbing each word. Their experiences were foreign to him in some ways, yet he felt a deep connection to their resilience, their courage, and the ease with which they spoke of life. He found himself responding, first with short, careful sentences, then with more detailed accounts of his own life. He spoke of his work on the land, the quiet routines he had developed, the long stretches of solitude he had come to accept. He told them about the small joys that punctuated his days, the sound of the wind, the sight of deer grazing near his fields, the satisfaction of completing a day's work with nothing left undone. To his surprise, the women listened attentively, asking questions not out of judgment but out of genuine interest. They were not there to criticize or mock. They were there to understand, to share in his world for a short while. As the hours passed, the storm began to lessen. The wind softened, and the rain slowed to a gentle patter against the roof. But inside the cabin, the energy remained. The four women, though strangers, had brought a sense of life and connection that Samuel had not felt in years. He realized that despite his solitude, despite his belief that life would always be quiet and uneventful, there were moments like these, rare, unexpected, transformative moments, that reminded him of the world's capacity for surprise and generosity. They laughed together, shared small stories and anecdotes, and Samuel felt a warmth growing in his chest that he had not known in years. There was no rush, no agenda, only the simple act of sharing a night together, of being present with one another. The storm outside, which had seemed threatening at first, became a backdrop to this extraordinary encounter, a reminder of how unpredictably life could unfold. He felt grateful for their courage to approach him, for their willingness to step into his world, and for the simple, human connection that he had almost forgotten existed. As midnight approached, the women began to prepare for sleep. Samuel offered the spare blankets and space on his floor, insisting that they make themselves comfortable. He watched them settle in, noticing the quiet confidence in their movements, the trust they placed in a man they had just met. It was remarkable to him, this willingness to share their night with a stranger, and he felt a mix of awe and humility. He understood, in that moment, that life often brought opportunities for connection in ways that defied logic or expectation. Finally, Samuel took his place near the fire, watching the last flickers of flame dance across the room. He reflected on the evening, on the strange, wonderful series of events that had brought four strangers to his door in the midst of a storm. He realized that despite the years of loneliness, despite the quiet life he had accepted as normal, there were still surprises waiting in the world, moments of human connection that could pierce even the deepest solitude. And as he drifted towards sleep, he felt a sense of anticipation, a quiet hope that this night might mark the beginning of something entirely new, a chapter in his life that he had never imagined possible. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a clean, fresh scent in the air. Samuel listened to the gentle sounds of the night, the occasional rustle of leaves, the soft breathing of the women nearby, the loyal presence of his dog at his side. He felt a calm satisfaction, a reassurance that life, no matter how quiet or lonely it might seem, had the power to surprise, to bring joy, and to create connections that could change everything. In that moment, Samuel understood that sometimes the most extraordinary experiences came from the simplest acts, the decision to open one's door, to welcome strangers, and to embrace the unexpected. The night had settled fully over Samuel's cabin, leaving only the soft glow of the fire and the occasional flicker of lightning far off on the horizon. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the air, the occasional gust of wind, the smell of wet earth, and the subtle rhythm of raindrops that still clung to leaves and windows. Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting. The four women, now more comfortable, had shifted closer to the fire, drying their clothes and settling into the small space with an ease that surprised Samuel. Their presence, which had initially felt strange and unexpected, was beginning to feel natural, even comforting. Samuel had never been in a room so full of voices, stories, and laughter. It was not loud or chaotic. Rather, it was a steady, calming presence, like a river flowing quietly but persistently through the cabin. Each woman had a distinct personality, a different way of speaking and moving that made the air feel alive. One spoke in gentle, thoughtful tones, describing the landscape she had crossed with a poet's eye. Another laughed freely, her energy sparking small smiles even in the corners of the room. The third was calm and observant, asking questions that made Samuel think more deeply about his own life, his choices, and his routines. The fourth carried herself with a quiet strength, a sense of determination and courage that inspired him without words. Samuel, initially shy and reserved, found himself drawn into the conversation. At first he spoke in short sentences, carefully choosing words as if he feared saying too much. But the women listened without judgment, with genuine curiosity and attention. Slowly he began to share stories from his life. The long days spent tending the fields, the satisfaction of watching plants grow and animals thrive, the quiet routines that had shaped his world. He spoke of his dog, a loyal companion who had been by his side for many years, of the sunrise walks he took when the world was still asleep, and of the small joys that he had cultivated in solitude. As he spoke, the women shared their own experiences. They told him about traveling through forests and deserts, about nights spent under the stars, about challenges they had faced and overcome. Samuel listened intently, fascinated by their courage and perspective. He realized that their lives, though very different from his own, shared a common thread: resilience, hope, and the quiet strength that comes from facing the world with determination. For the first time in many years, Samuel felt a sense of connection, as if the distance he had always felt between himself and others was slowly narrowing. The conversation moved naturally, flowing from stories of the past to reflections on the present. Samuel found himself opening up about feelings he had rarely voiced. He spoke of loneliness, of the nights when the silence of his cabin felt almost overwhelming, of the hope that perhaps one day life would offer him meaningful connections. He did so not out of complaint, but because he sensed that these women would understand without judgment. And they did. They nodded, smiled, and shared similar feelings, creating an atmosphere of trust and understanding that Samuel had never experienced with strangers. As the night deepened, the fire cast long shadows across the walls, illuminating faces and gestures in soft, flickering light. Samuel noticed small details he had not observed before: the way one woman's eyes sparkled when she laughed, the thoughtful tilt of another's head as she listened, the gentle way the third brushed her hair back from her face, and the calm confidence of the fourth as she settled near the fire. Each detail seemed to draw him further into the moment, making him aware of the richness of human presence, of the ways in which even small gestures could convey warmth, understanding, and companionship. Time passed unnoticed. There was no clock, no strict schedule, only the shared rhythm of conversation, laughter, and the occasional comfortable silence. Samuel realized that he had been craving such moments for years, even if he did not fully understand it. The presence of these four women, strangers though they were, had created a space in which he could relax, reflect, and connect. For the first time in his life, he did not feel the need to hide behind walls of solitude. He felt accepted, understood, and most importantly, seen. At one point, one of the women suggested a simple game to pass the time, a storytelling exercise where each person would begin a sentence and the next would continue it. Samuel hesitated, unsure at first, but the warm smiles and encouraging glances convinced him to participate. The game quickly became lively and joyful. Stories twisted and turned, characters emerged, and situations became amusing or surprising. Laughter filled the cabin, mingling with the crackle of the fire and the gentle sounds of the night outside. Samuel had not laughed like this in years, and the sensation was both freeing and exhilarating. Between stories, the conversation took a more reflective turn. They spoke of dreams, fears, and the hopes they carried in their hearts. Samuel shared his desire to experience life more fully, to embrace connections rather than retreat into solitude, and to appreciate the beauty and unpredictability of the world. The women listened and offered insights, drawing from their own experiences. They spoke of the strength required to trust others, the courage needed to step into the unknown, and the joy that could be found in simple, genuine connections. Samuel absorbed their words, realizing that his life had been rich in many ways, but that there was still so much more to experience. The fire burned lower, but the warmth and energy in the cabin did not fade. Samuel found himself observing the women more closely, noticing the subtle ways in which they carried themselves, the kindness in their gestures, and the clarity of their eyes. He felt a deep respect and admiration for them, not only for their courage to travel through a storm, but for the way they had shared themselves so openly, creating an environment where he could do the same. It was a rare and beautiful experience, one that made him reflect on the possibilities of human connection and the unexpected ways in which it could appear. At one point, the women asked Samuel about his daily routines, about the things that brought him joy and satisfaction. He spoke about the simplicity of his life, the careful attention he gave to his land, the small moments of beauty he found in nature, and the comfort of his dog's loyal presence. They listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that encouraged him to reflect on his life with appreciation rather than regret. Through these questions, Samuel realized that his life, while solitary, had been meaningful in its own way. Yet the evening also revealed the potential for a new chapter, a chance to expand his world, to embrace relationships, and to share experiences with others. The night continued with quiet laughter, deep conversation, and moments of comfortable silence. Samuel felt a sense of peace and belonging that he had not known in years. The women, too, seemed at ease, sharing stories, offering guidance, and celebrating the simple joys of being together. There was no hurry, no pressure, only the shared experience of presence, trust, and understanding. Samuel reflected on how extraordinary this night was, how a single evening could transform a life, and how the unexpected could arrive when one least expected it. As the fire burned its last, Samuel noticed that the first hints of dawn were appearing on the horizon. The storm had passed completely, leaving a fresh, crisp morning in its wake. He looked around the cabin and felt a deep sense of gratitude. These four women, strangers who had appeared at his door in the midst of a storm, had brought warmth, connection, and laughter into his life. They had reminded him that even in solitude, life could surprise, could bring joy, and could create bonds that transcended circumstance. Before the women began to prepare for the day, Samuel offered them simple breakfast and warm tea. The conversation continued, lighter now, filled with stories of past travels, favorite foods, and small amusements. He realized that despite the brevity of their stay, these women had become an important part of his life story, leaving an imprint that would remain with him long after they departed. The experience had opened his heart, rekindled his curiosity about others, and shown him that connection could appear when least expected. Finally, it was time for the women to leave. They gathered their belongings and stepped into the morning light, smiles on their faces, expressions of genuine gratitude for the kindness and hospitality Samuel had shown. He walked them to the edge of his property, feeling a mixture of pride, admiration, and wistful longing. Though their stay had been brief, it had changed him. He realized that life's most meaningful moments often came unexpectedly, and that the courage to welcome the unknown could create experiences more profound than he had ever imagined. As the women disappeared into the distance, Samuel returned to his cabin, feeling a mixture of contentment and anticipation. He knew that this night would remain etched in his memory, a testament to the power of human connection, the beauty of trust, and the extraordinary possibilities that life could offer even to someone who had once believed himself destined for loneliness. For the first time in many years, Samuel felt that the future held promise, that his life could expand in ways he had never dared to imagine, and that the quiet man he had been might yet experience the richness of shared human presence. The night deepened in the cabin, the soft glow of the fire casting shadows that danced across the walls. Outside, the storm had passed entirely, leaving the world washed clean and the air fresh with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Samuel sat quietly, watching the women as they moved about, arranging their small space, folding wet blankets and quietly helping one another. Each gesture, each subtle action, conveyed kindness, thoughtfulness, and a gentle strength that Samuel had rarely witnessed so directly in others. He felt his heart expand in ways he had never imagined, a sense of gratitude and wonder stirring deep within him. For the first time in a long time, Samuel felt truly present with others. He was not simply observing life from the edges or participating in routine interactions. He was fully immersed, sharing this moment with 4 strangers who had entered his world unexpectedly and without hesitation. Their presence brought warmth, laughter, and energy that contrasted beautifully with the quiet he had grown used to. It was a strange, delightful balance. Solitude had shaped him, but companionship now enriched him in ways that solitude never could. The women began to tell more personal stories, speaking of moments in their lives that required courage and resilience. One of them described her childhood in a distant village, where she had learned to navigate the challenges of life at a young age, balancing responsibility with hope. Another spoke of her journey across rugged landscapes, of nights spent under the stars with nothing but a blanket and her determination to keep moving forward. Samuel listened in rapt attention, not only fascinated by the experiences themselves, but by the way each woman spoke with calm confidence, wisdom, and a quiet joy in life's simplest pleasures. As the night wore on, Samuel felt more compelled to share his own stories. He spoke of growing up on the outskirts of town, of learning the rhythms of the land from his father, and of the years he had spent quietly, working, observing, and reflecting. He shared moments of both struggle and triumph, the satisfaction of harvesting a successful crop, the challenge of rebuilding his cabin after a winter storm, the deep bond he had formed with his dog over the years. For each story, the women listened with genuine interest, their eyes reflecting understanding, empathy, and admiration. Samuel realized he had never truly experienced this level of attention and engagement before. It was a rare and profound gift. One of the women leaned forward, her eyes shining in the firelight, and asked Samuel what he most wished for in life. The question caught him off guard, for he had rarely spoken aloud about his dreams or desires. He paused, searching for words that felt true, and then answered honestly. He spoke of his longing for meaningful human connection, for the opportunity to share his life and experiences with others, and for the chance to feel truly understood. The women nodded, acknowledging his honesty, and one of them offered a gentle reassurance that the world had a way of bringing people together when least expected, and that even those who had spent years in solitude could find companionship and understanding. The conversation shifted naturally to lighter topics, and laughter began to fill the cabin. They told stories of small, humorous events from their travels, moments when life had surprised them, or when circumstances had led to unexpected adventures. Samuel found himself smiling more freely than he had in years, the tension and caution of his solitude melting away in the warmth of shared joy. He noticed how each woman's presence complemented the others, creating a harmonious energy that filled the room. There was curiosity, wisdom, humor, and strength, all mingling together in a way that made Samuel feel both alive and at peace. At one point, they decided to share songs and stories from their own cultures. One of the women began softly singing a tune she had learned as a child, her voice melodic and soothing, carrying memories of home and family. The others joined in with simple harmonies, and Samuel felt a shiver of awe run through him. He had never experienced music in this way before, not as something simply heard, but as something lived, shared, and felt deeply. The fire flickered and crackled, the night stretched on, and Samuel felt as if time itself had paused to allow this extraordinary moment to unfold. The night also brought moments of quiet reflection. Between conversations and laughter, Samuel would glance around the cabin, observing the women's expressions as they listened, shared, or simply rested near the fire. There was a calm understanding in their eyes, a reassurance that he was accepted exactly as he was. He realized that this acceptance, this presence, was something he had longed for without fully knowing it. In their company, he felt safe to express thoughts and emotions he had never spoken aloud, to reveal the depth of his inner life without fear of judgment or rejection. As the hours passed, the four women suggested small activities to pass the time, things that encouraged interaction and creativity. They drew simple pictures, shared sketches of places they had visited, and even built tiny arrangements from materials they found around the cabin. Samuel found himself participating with enthusiasm, realizing how much he had missed the simple pleasure of shared creativity and collaboration. Each activity, though modest, strengthened the bond forming between them, creating a sense of community and shared experience that was rare and precious. Samuel also noticed the subtle ways the women took care of one another, anticipating needs without being asked, and offering help with patience and respect. One of them adjusted a blanket for another, who had grown slightly cold. Another prepared a small cup of tea for someone who had been standing near the fire too long. These acts of kindness, performed quietly and without expectation, impressed Samuel deeply. He reflected on the value of attentiveness and compassion, on the ways small gestures could convey connection, care, and understanding more powerfully than words alone. By the time the fire had burned low, Samuel realized that the night had transformed him in ways he had not anticipated. He felt lighter, more open, and more connected to the world than he had in years. The presence of these four women, strangers who had arrived uninvited in a storm, had revealed the possibilities of human connection, the richness of shared experience, and the beauty of trust. He understood that his solitude had not been a punishment, but a preparation for this extraordinary night, a time when he could fully appreciate the warmth, laughter, and companionship that life could offer. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the women prepared to rest. Samuel offered them blankets, pillows, and whatever comfort he could provide. They expressed gratitude, not only for the shelter but for the warmth of his home and the kindness he had shown. Samuel felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had been able to provide comfort, understanding, and companionship to people who had needed it, just as they had provided him with an experience he would carry in his heart forever. Before sleep overtook them all, Samuel reflected quietly on the night's events. He realized that this night, which had begun as an ordinary stormy evening, had become one of the most meaningful experiences of his life. The four women had brought light into his solitude, laughter into his quiet moments, and connection into a life that had long been defined by isolation. He understood, in a profound way, that life's surprises often came in unexpected forms, and that the courage to welcome strangers and embrace new experiences could lead to moments of true transformation. As the first light of morning crept through the cabin windows, Samuel felt a renewed sense of hope and possibility. He understood that while the women might soon leave, the impact of their presence would remain with him, shaping his thoughts, feelings, and choices for years to come. He had been reminded that human connection was not a luxury, but a fundamental part of life, and that even the most solitary person could find joy, understanding, and companionship when openness and trust were embraced. The fire had dwindled to embers, but the warmth in the cabin lingered. Samuel looked at the women, each now resting or quietly talking, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had never anticipated such a night, and yet it had unfolded with perfect timing and extraordinary grace. He knew that his life would never be quite the same, that the solitude he had known would now be balanced by the memory and experience of connection, laughter, and shared stories. Finally, as the morning grew brighter and the first birds began to sing outside, Samuel felt a quiet contentment. He had witnessed something rare and beautiful, a night where strangers became companions, stories became shared experiences, and solitude became enriched by presence. He understood that this experience was not merely a fleeting moment, but a lasting lesson about the possibilities of life, the power of trust, and the unexpected joys that could arrive when one opened the door, both literally and figuratively, to the world. Samuel settled near the window, watching the sun rise over the fields he had tended for so many years. The women slept peacefully, their breathing steady and calm. He reflected on the night with a sense of awe, realizing that life could surprise even those who thought they had seen it all. For the first time in a long while, Samuel did not feel the weight of loneliness pressing down upon him. Instead, he felt light, open, and ready to embrace the unknown, whatever it might bring. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, painting the room in soft golden hues. Samuel stirred quietly, careful not to wake the four women who had become such an extraordinary presence in his life overnight. The cabin, which had felt like a simple shelter, now seemed almost magical after the events of the night. Everything felt different, lighter, warmer, more alive. Samuel could still feel the lingering energy of the conversations, laughter, and stories they had shared, and it filled him with a sense of gratitude he could hardly put into words. He stood slowly and stretched, looking around at the small space that had held so much that night. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a soft warmth across the floor. Samuel's dog lay nearby, eyes half closed, sensing the calm yet joyful energy in the cabin. The women were still asleep, their peaceful breathing steady and even. Samuel smiled softly, remembering their stories, their laughter, and the quiet moments of connection that had transformed the night into something unforgettable. Samuel decided to prepare a simple breakfast for everyone before they woke. He moved about the cabin quietly, boiling water for tea, toasting a few pieces of bread, and slicing fresh fruit he had stored in his kitchen. He wanted the morning to be as comforting as the night had been. As he worked, he reflected on the events of the previous hours, realizing how unusual and extraordinary the experience had been. He had never imagined that a single night could bring such joy, laughter, and a sense of belonging into his life. Yet, here it was, proof that the world was capable of surprising even those who thought themselves destined for solitude. The women began to stir, stretching and shaking off the remnants of sleep. They greeted Samuel with warm smiles and words of thanks, expressing their appreciation for his hospitality. Samuel felt a gentle warmth in his chest, knowing that he had been able to provide comfort and safety, just as they had brought light and life into his night. He poured tea for each of them and served the small breakfast with care, ensuring that everyone felt welcome and at ease. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally, shifting from reflections on the night to plans for the day ahead. The women spoke of the journeys they still had to continue, the places they hoped to visit, and the tasks they needed to accomplish. Samuel listened, offering suggestions and advice when asked, but mostly enjoying the sound of their voices and the ease of shared companionship. It was a rare and precious moment, a final continuation of the connection they had formed overnight. Once breakfast was finished, Samuel helped the women gather their belongings. They had traveled lightly, carrying only the essentials, yet even those small items represented the lives they had led and the experiences that had shaped them. As they packed, Samuel could not help but feel a sense of wistfulness. The night had been so full of warmth and connection that the thought of saying goodbye felt almost painful. Yet, he understood that their journey must continue, just as his own life would go on. Before leaving, the women stepped outside to stretch and take in the morning air. The storm had left the world fresh and vibrant, with dew glistening on the grass and birds singing joyfully in the trees. Samuel walked with them to the edge of his property, feeling a mixture of pride, gratitude, and a gentle sadness at their impending departure. He noticed the confidence and calm in their movements, the quiet strength that had drawn him to admire them so deeply the night before. Each one carried herself with dignity, yet there was a warmth in their expressions, a reminder of the human kindness and connection they had shared with him. One of the women turned to Samuel, her eyes meeting his with sincerity. She thanked him for opening his home and heart, acknowledging the comfort and understanding he had provided. Another spoke of the laughter and stories they had shared, expressing how rare and meaningful it was to encounter such genuine hospitality. Samuel felt a deep sense of fulfillment, realizing that he had not only offered them shelter, but had also participated in a shared experience that would remain with all of them for years to come. Before they left, Samuel took a moment to reflect on the night and its significance. He realized that this experience had changed him in ways he could not have anticipated. The loneliness that had once seemed permanent now felt less heavy, replaced by a quiet hope and the knowledge that connection could appear in the most unexpected ways. He understood that life's surprises often came without warning, and that the courage to welcome others, even strangers, could lead to experiences of deep meaning and joy. The women gathered their belongings and waved to Samuel one last time, stepping onto the path that led away from his cabin. Samuel watched them disappear into the morning light, feeling a mixture of gratitude and longing. He knew that their time together had been brief, but he also understood that the impact of their presence would remain with him forever. Their visit had reminded him of the value of human connection, the beauty of trust, and the extraordinary power of shared experiences. After the women had gone, Samuel returned to his cabin, feeling both a sense of peace and a renewed curiosity about life. He moved about his home with a quiet energy, tending to his chores and observing the world around him with fresh eyes. The fields, the animals, and the familiar routines of his life suddenly felt more vibrant, more meaningful. He realized that solitude, while comforting in many ways, could be enriched by moments of connection, and that even brief encounters could leave lasting impressions. Samuel spent the rest of the morning writing in his journal, capturing the memories of the night and the lessons he had learned. He wrote about the laughter, the stories, and the quiet moments of reflection that had made the night so special. He recorded his feelings of gratitude, the warmth he had experienced, and the sense of possibility that had been reignited within him. Through writing, he was able to process the depth of his emotions and ensure that the experience would not fade with time. In the days that followed, Samuel continued his work on the land with renewed vigor. Each task, from tending to the fields to caring for his animals, was approached with a sense of appreciation and mindfulness. He found himself recalling the stories and laughter of the women, their courage and wisdom, and the joy of shared experiences. Their visit had left an indelible mark on his life, reminding him that the world was full of unexpected gifts, and that even those who believed themselves destined for loneliness could find connection, understanding, and joy. Samuel also became more open to interaction with his neighbors and other travelers. He discovered a newfound confidence in sharing his thoughts, stories, and experiences, and he approached conversations with a sense of curiosity and warmth. While he still cherished his solitude, he understood that life was enriched by moments of connection, and that the courage to engage with others could lead to meaningful experiences. He no longer saw his quiet life as a limitation, but as a foundation upon which new relationships and memories could be built. Months later, when Samuel reflected on that night, he realized how profoundly it had changed him. The storm, the unexpected visitors, and the shared moments of laughter and reflection had shifted his perspective on life. He understood that solitude was not a punishment but a choice, one that could coexist with connection, joy, and shared experience. He also recognized that life's most meaningful moments often came when he was willing to open his heart, to welcome others, and to embrace the unexpected. The memory of the 4 women stayed with Samuel, not as a fleeting moment, but as a guiding presence in his life. He carried the lessons of trust, courage, and connection into every aspect of his daily routine, whether working the land, interacting with neighbors, or simply observing the natural world around him. Their visit had shown him that even a life lived largely in solitude could be enriched by the warmth of companionship, the beauty of shared stories, and the simple joy of human connection. Samuel's dog remained his loyal companion, but now he also understood that his heart could hold more friendship, more understanding, and more openness to the world. The quiet cabin on the edge of the town, once a place of solitude and reflection, had become a sanctuary of experience, memory, and personal growth. Samuel felt grateful for the night that had unfolded so unexpectedly, and he cherished the knowledge that life had the power to surprise, to bring people together, and to create moments that could change everything. Years later, Samuel would often recall that night when he felt truly seen and connected. He remembered the warmth of the fire, the voices of the 4 women, the stories they shared, and the laughter that had echoed through the cabin. He understood that while life continued with its routines and quiet moments, there were times when extraordinary experiences could arrive without warning, leaving an imprint on the heart and shaping the person he would become. The experience had also inspired Samuel to be more open and generous in his own life. He welcomed travelers who passed near his home, shared stories with neighbors, and offered kindness to those in need. Though he continued to value solitude, he no longer feared it as the only way of life. He had learned that connection, compassion, and understanding could coexist with quiet reflection, and that the door to human experience was always open, waiting for the courage to step through. Samuel's life, once thought destined for loneliness, had been transformed by a single night of courage, trust, and shared humanity. The 4 women who arrived during the storm had shown him the beauty of connection, the power of empathy, and the importance of embracing life's unexpected moments. Their visit was a gift that remained with him, guiding his thoughts, shaping his interactions and reminding him every day that even the quietest life could hold extraordinary experiences. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the fields and forests around his cabin, Samuel stood for a moment outside, feeling the breeze on his face and the warmth of the morning light. He looked at the path that the women had taken and felt a gentle gratitude for their presence, their stories, and the lessons they had shared. He understood that life was full of surprises, that the smallest gestures could leave lasting impressions, and that even a man who had once believed himself destined for solitude could find joy, connection, and meaning. In that moment, Samuel smiled softly to himself, feeling the fullness of the night's impact and the hope of all the possibilities that still lay ahead. He knew that his life would continue in quiet, steady rhythms, but it would never again be the same. The experience had opened his heart, enriched his spirit, and reminded him that life's beauty often arrived when it was least expected, through the kindness, courage, and presence of others willing to share even a single night.